Welcome to Coffee Shop Conversations, a space for experts, innovators, and creative educators to express their thoughts, raise ideas, and share experiences. Coffee Shop Conversations addresses contemporary education issues faced by the global community of schools. A diverse range of teachers, leaders, and industry professionals are engaged to address matters that matter to schools.
This is episode 1, and we're going to focus on strategies for successful online learning. My name's Steve Wishart, and I'm the manager for Australasia, IB World Schools. It's great to have the opportunity to have a long-form discussion with a group of well-renowned educators. We've got a wonderful group of presenters supporting our discussion today. Some have had significant experience in terms of being in an e-learning environment for quite some time. Others are starting their experience now. They're at the start of their journey and are just learning how things are panning out for them, and have learnt from those that have been at it for quite some time. We'd like to highlight some of the strategies that have worked and reflect on some of the important considerations that to be thought about when engaging with an online learning environment. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel of experienced educators today. I'll start off with Dr. Jennifer Chang Wathel, who is an independent educational consultant, author and part-time instructor for the University of Hong Kong. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me on.
No problem. David Boardman is the principal of the senior school at Kirsten School in New Zealand. He's a member of the IB Heads Council, secretary of IB Schools Australasia, and chair of the New Zealand IB Heads Caucus. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
Chris Barr is the head of primary at Discovery College in Hong Kong. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on board.
No problem. And Matt Barron is the head of primary at Cardinia International College in Australia. Thanks for coming, Matt.
My pleasure. Thanks, Steve.
And we've got Sean Johnson, who is the DP coordinator at Ivanhoe Grammar in Australia. Sean is also the chair of the Victorian and Tasmanian DP network. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
And we've got Sharon Bailey, who is the assistant principal and PYP coordinator at Auburn South Primary School. She's also the chair of the Victorian and Tasmanian PYP network.
Hi, Steve. Great to be here.
And finally, we've got Manita and Avi. They're both global authorisation managers for PYP and DPCP, respectively. And lots of people would know Manita and Avi particularly within this region.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, so if we start our conversation on online learning, Jennifer, if I could start with you, given your experience, what are some of the tips you would have for schools engaged in e-learning?
I think some of the tips that I would outline is probably that there is a natural and normal process of e-learning adoption. And there are different stages that we go through to actually get to a stage where we actually transform our pedagogy and transform our learning. So I think when we were thrust into the situation in Asia, we were probably given, 3 days to prepare or not even a week. And so, initially it was really a firefighting stage, which was about a survival mode. What LMS are we going to use? What digital tools are we going to use? Do I even have my computer at home and my laptop? I know teachers were scattered throughout the world. And so once we go through that survive stage, the next stage is actually strive. So strive is when we actually start looking at how do we use these digital tools, releasing instructional videos, probably still encouraging an asynchronous learning environment for the moment for those first 2 stages. And then after that stage, I think there's a thrive stage where we start looking at pedagogical approaches and how we can enhance learning with our students. And then we can start thinking about developing pedagogy and, the learning that's happening once we're over those firefighting stages. And then the last stage of e-learning adoption is really about that arrival arrive? Have we arrived at a complete transformation of pedagogy and learning that enhances student achievement as well as their experiences in the online environment, and have a completed unit of inquiry that focuses on learning and the best practice of effective blended learning research and frameworks and models? So that would be some of my tips. Just one more I'm going to mention is that there are some very important elements in blended learning, and the four important elements cover the connections that we have to have with our students and how important that is now that we are a distance and it is, trying to facilitate this remote learning environment. So the connections, the clarification that your students and teachers are going to have so many questions that they need that clarification space. The collaboration, we've still got to promote as one of the very important approaches to teaching pedagogical principles in the IB. So how are we going to do that? And we found there's things that work and things that don't work. And then, of course, that conceptual and critical thinking that we want to promote. So those very four important elements in a blended learning environment are key, I think, to success when you actually design a program for e-learning.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jenny, for that. What do you, just in you looking at schools around, where you're working, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing schools face, and how are they overcoming some of these challenges?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me this question because I'm going to be really controversial. Is that okay?
That's encouraged.
So I do work with schools around the world. I'm working with a province in Canada at the moment, and they're in their 3rd and 4th week. So it's lovely to see their progress. I work with schools in Asia in their 12th week, and then in Europe, and they're probably in between Canada and Asia here. And one of the lessons, I think, one of the challenges was that when schools went to this e-learning, remote distance learning environment, it was more of an emergency situation where they tried to transfer their entire brick and mortar timetable to the online environment because they didn't have the time to prepare. A true blended learning program takes 6 to 12 months to prepare. And if you're given 3 days or even no notice, in Canada, one of the teachers was saying to me, she was told that basically the next day they weren't allowed into their schools and that they had 1 day to prepare. So when you're in that kind of situation, we do have to default to this emergency remote distance learning program where it may look like the brick and mortar. But I think through the weeks of experience and what schools have been feeding back to me is that is probably not the most effective way to facilitate online learning, having the exact same brick and mortar, timetable, as well as the same brick and mortar learning experiences. I think teachers really have to rethink what learning looks like, because some of those practices are not going to transfer and translate in terms of student engagement and motivation. I think many schools are finding that students are starting to drop off in terms of their engagement, and what we have to think, well, why is that? Rethink our approaches.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice, Jenny, because there's so many examples of schools that have, and not through their own fault, but have treated the e-learning environment exactly the same as the face-to-face classroom environment, and it's caused trouble over time, and we've seen that evolution of the program as it's progressed. So thanks so much for that, for your insights there. I'm sure that's going to really support our schools, and especially those schools moving into this environment at the moment. Anthony, sorry, I didn't get to introduce you before. Anthony Mayhofer is the Director of Learning Services at St Paul's Grammar in Australia, and is a standing committee member of the IB Schools Australasia. Anthony, I was wondering if you and a group could perhaps answer the next question. Anthony, Avi, and Sean and David, how are your respective networks and portfolios dealing with online learning at the moment? Just from what you've seen in your local areas, how are your specific schools handling the transition? If I could start with you, Anthony, if that's okay.
Yes, as Jennifer was saying, the schools were really thrust into this with very little notice in Australasia, and in some cases, essentially it was coming up to the end of the school term and schools were effectively shut down, whereas in our state of New South Wales, schools continued for a couple of weeks. And essentially it was almost within a day, they went from delivering lessons like to students in front of a classroom to delivering lessons online. And I guess schools that had a really well embedded learning management system have been able to cope really much more effectively with that than those that haven't. That's been a real challenge for schools that haven't. Some schools have changed their timetables, but most schools in New South Wales have maintained the timetable under the current structure.
Thanks, Anthony. Avi, just in your role, you have oversight over a number of schools. I'm just wondering what you've seen and heard in this period.
Yes, I mean, very similar to what Jennifer and Anthony were also saying earlier. All the schools have been thrust into the online learning situation, and exactly what Anthony said, having the LMS in place already for schools has really been very helpful and effective, particularly if they already had the online learning protocols in place. I think that has helped a lot of schools. But across the board, I would say that schools have had different experiences, different countries have had different experiences. And one of the things that has happened to quite a large extent was, of course, in the early days, I know that schools in Australia and New Zealand are still not quite sure about what's going to be happening with the November exams, but we did have the May exams coming up really soon, and there was a lot of anxiety with teachers elsewhere in the world, not able to get back, synchronous, asynchronous learning, trying to manage all of that with very limited, as Jennifer said, any type of devices for either the students or the teachers and so on. So there was that entire survival mode that went on for quite a while, and it's been settling down. But some schools have been able to get onto the situation really promptly and support their students. But one of the things that I hear constantly is that well-being for students, well-being for parents, well-being for the staff. And that has been a major issue. And I think that is really such an important part of what we have to do to support, because that obviously when we're looking at schools that are wanting to be authorized, they're very, very worried that they're going to fail in some way or the other just because they can't provide all the evidence they need remotely. And we have to be really respectful of the situation they're in. So I mean, it's teachers working together basically to solve this and sort it out and get through the ground as easily as we can.
Thanks, Avi. Sean, you give some insight into the Victorian and Tasmanian DP network.
Well, I mean, the Victorian Tasmanian network is a collection of 22 diploma programs, and I suppose our community has quite a diverse range, really, in terms of how the COVID-19 was more or less thrust upon us. We had one school in our network was closed quite early because of a coronavirus case. We had other schools that essentially transitioned into this supported learning from home. We have some state schools, which of course they're under a slightly different jurisdiction. And then of course we also had boarding schools within our network, which I think in terms of well-being raises a number of different sort of issues that schools like my own at Ivanhoe Grammar don't have borders. So, there was a really, I suppose, I think a really interesting tension in many ways, I think within each school. And I think a couple of points that have been raised already, both about the school's capacity to prepare for this, I think is slightly different within the different contexts. I was just saying, I think it was more or less sort of the teacher equivalent of sort of prepping for the end of the world. I was packing my bag essentially with all of my books and all of my marking every evening, not knowing whether or not I'd be in work the next day. So I think those sorts of things were at play and continue to be at play in some point. And from a diploma program perspective, I mean, there is a great deal of anxiety around the November exams. And, our students, I had my theory of knowledge lesson about 15 minutes ago, actually, I finished it, or just before this recorded presentation. And, the students are beginning to ask, well, this happened in May, will it happen for us? And, and so, of course, we're trying to balance, I suppose, our messages and also the optics there, both from a school's perspective, but also making sure that that there is the consistency from the IB and the IB's messaging there with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sean. And David, your perspective from New Zealand.
Yeah, I suppose we're in one of the luckier positions that we sort of got a little bit of a heads up, maybe about 2 weeks, that it was potentially coming. So quite a few of our schools, especially our IB schools, started to prepare for that. And I know we did. We gave our staff some PL around using things like Zoom and how they could modify their delivery using the LMS that we had in place to facilitate that online learning, and also talking to them about, as Jennifer said, you can't just transpose your normal day onto an online environment.
Yeah.
So very much sort of taking a mixture of a flipped and a blended approach to that. But we've also been very cognizant of the fact that we're learning. So opening those communication channels early with parents, explaining what we're doing, and asking for some feedback. So after about 2 weeks of running the program, you're getting that feedback, listening to it, and making the adjustments. And we're in a lucky position at the moment that we're on Easter holiday and we're able to make those adjustments for when we come back into term. I suppose we're lucky as well in the IB schools that, all bar, I believe, 3 of our IB schools in New Zealand, especially in diploma, are independent schools. And the 3 who are state are up at the top of the socioeconomic scale. So they've all got the facilities, the students have got the technology and the devices and are comfortable with using it. To make that shift. And a lot of our senior school students have actually said they really enjoy it. They're very focused students. They like at the top end that ownership of their own time and being able to manage it themselves.
Thanks, David. Yeah, some great insights there, supporting particularly those DP schools. Chris, Matt and Sharon, I was wondering if you could talk about some tips to share with primary schools regarding e-learning that you've got already. I know Chris has been doing it for probably a lot longer than others. Just if we could start off with Chris, then move to Matt and then Sharon, just about some tips that you have to share with the IB community regarding primary schools. Chris?
Thanks, Steve. I think one of the things I'm listening to and reflecting on is that we almost had a little bit of an advantage, because prior to COVID-19, we actually had 2 weeks of protests that closed our schools as well back in November and December. So we had a little bit of a head start in that way, and we were able to trial a few things and see what worked and what didn't work. But in saying that, nothing prepared us for what we were about to face at the end of Chinese New Year. So for me, it's really, I think I've pulled it down to sort of 3 main things, and I think it's got to be contextual. It's got to look at what the needs are of your school community. Even in Hong Kong, we're all in very different communities. So one of the things that we looked at doing was really surveying our stakeholders, finding out what's important to them, what do they value. We've got 58 different nationalities within our schools, so they all come with very different perspectives of what education should look like on the best of days, let alone when we go into an online home learning environment. So that was a really important piece for us. We've continued to survey our families sort of every 3 to 4 weeks just to touch base and see what we're doing well and what we could improve, but also just keeping in mind that as educators, we need to make the right decisions for the kids from an educational perspective and not necessarily appeasing every single parent sort of stakeholder. Probably the next thing that I was sort of really considering about, and when Jennifer was talking about the bricks and mortar, I suppose it's got to be in the realm of what both teachers and students can achieve from both a professional perspective as well as a wellbeing perspective. And that was one of the things that we learnt very quickly. We hit the ground really fast and all guns blazing, and we pulled out a 6-block timetable, and we did what most schools around the world are doing. But it was very evident very quickly that we weren't going to be able to sustain the pace, and we needed to rethink what we did. Through the surveys, through listening to people, we made some changes to our structure. We lessened the load a little bit. We ensured we continued to listen. And then I suppose the big thing for us is we made sure we stayed true to ourselves as an IB school. And we really look to balance the curriculum. So all our single subject teachers are producing lessons every week. Our PE, music, art, drama, our learning diversity team, they're all engaged in lessons, because one of the things that we were looking to do was ensure students had an opportunity to play to their strengths in the home environment just as much. we had a lot of parents wanting language and maths, and they wanted to push language and maths and just keep that going. But the importance of the balanced curriculum, especially from a primary student's perspective, was vital. So that's been a real key to us. And I suppose the last one that I'd give would be around use the resources available to you. We're in an unexperienced time where we've got so many e-resources out there that companies are offering licenses and free opportunities and things like that. And I think down the track that will suit them. But there's so much out there, and I've been absolutely amazed at the way teachers have engaged with technology, the speed they've come up to so quickly. It's almost forced our hands to take innovation to the next level for this. And the other element too that I think's the beauty of an IB curriculum as well from a teacher perspective is just the creativity. We often talk about how creativity gets lost in schools sometimes, but I think one of the things that I'm seeing is the creativity of our teachers is quite extraordinary. Back to the days of pulling out the cooking materials out of the cupboards and doing things that we wouldn't normally do in a school environment is really coming to the forefront. So they're the sort of things that have really sat as the key things for me.
Thanks for that. It was great, Chris, that the message linked with the DP with what David was saying in particular in making sure that you're listening to the students and your community as well, and surveying them and the like, not just imposing a system upon students and upon families, but actually listening to what their thoughts are and adjusting the program accordingly, and supporting well-being. That well-being element is coming through strong as well. Matt.
Thanks, Steve. Similar to Chris, we actually had a little bit of time to plan. We knew as a private independent school that we were going to close a week early and use that time for PD for our staff. So prior to that, the college leadership team spent a lot of time seeking some help from colleagues around the world. We went to schools in Singapore and Japan, Hong Kong, and just looked for some advice. And we knew that a lot of schools were already in a remote learning situation. Our situation's slightly different in that we are still expected to have students on site as well during the remote learning phase that we're in, the students of essential workers. But given that we had a week to plan for that, and then another week of PD, and then 2 weeks of school holiday, which really wasn't much of a holiday, but a lot more planning, we were able to launch the remote learning program pretty successfully. And some of the things we learned from our colleagues around the world that have certainly helped us is to have a really flexible learning menu. So what we do is our teachers all publish a learning menu for their learning groups between 8 and 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and that learning menu lasts for the whole week. We've got situations where some of our families can't get to learning on a Monday and a Tuesday because of what's happening in their home, and they really appreciate the fact that they can schedule their own learning across the week. In that learning menu, our teachers publish core learning engagements and optional learning engagements. Yep. So again, we've got some families who can contribute a lot of time to supporting their children, and others that can only maybe fit in an hour or two a day. So the optional learning engagements are obviously not just busy work. They're really important aspects of the learning that maybe allow the kids to go deeper, but they're not necessary to still maintain a basic understanding of the unit of inquiry or the learning that's happening. So that was something we learned from our colleagues, and it's been really successful. In fact, we've received lots of feedback from our families, and that's probably the number one thing they appreciate is the ability to develop a schedule across a week, knowing what the learning could look like, and they're doing some really creative things in terms of creating visual timetables with 3-year-olds that know what they're doing every day. So that's been really positive. We were also lucky that we had the tools already in place. We introduced Seesaw at the start of the year and Zoom, and coincidentally, they're the two platforms that have been prominent during remote learning. So we already had the tools in place, but we weren't expert in that. So we provided a week's PD using remote learning strategies for our teachers who stayed at home while we ran PD sessions for them with Zoom and a number of other tools as well. So we kind of walked the walk before we asked our students to do the same. So we all became experts at breakout rooms in Zoom and creating activities on Seesaw and understanding the challenges that went with that as a learner. So that helped as well. The other thing that we have introduced, which has been really successful, is daily check-ins with kids from a wellbeing point of view. So we've scheduled check-ins across the week at different times for different year levels. So between 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock every morning, each learning group meets with their learning group teacher, and it's a 20-minute to half-hour check-in. It's where we do the register. It's where we focus on how things are going. The teachers also have another Q&A session later in the day, which is optional. So the check-ins in the morning are what we ask to be compulsory, and for those kids that can do get into those sessions. And the Q&A in the afternoon might be with a learning group teacher, it might be with a single subject teacher or a learning diversity and inclusion teacher or a member of our wellbeing team, and it's just questions about the learning. So they might talk about the learning menu that's been posted and what the expectations are and help kids understand how they might tackle that. So that's been really successful. The other tip I would suggest is if you're starting off on this journey is to involve all stakeholders in all aspects of the learning, particularly the teaching staff, not just the teachers, but learning support officers have been really, really important in supporting students with their learning. And kids get a real kick out of seeing 4 or 5 staff members commenting on their Seesaw posts or responding to the learning that they've submitted. Whether that's a voice recording or a simple like or a written comment, it's actually something that motivates and has kept those kids going. We've also really relied on people that might just have a natural tendency to understand learning platforms or technology better than others. So in some cases, it's the learning support officer leading the lesson in aspects of technology, which has been really useful. But another tip is just involve everybody. We've made instructional videos on nearly everything, and we've published that on our website and in our other platforms for families to visit and look at as well, so that they're understanding how to support their kids and know what we're expecting them to do as well. So screencasts are definitely your friend during remote learning. Probably 2 other tips would be to pick up on things that Jenny and Chris have both said around the opportunities for learning rather than the bricks and mortar timetable that Jenny talked about. The learning across the week works, but we've tried to maintain a focus on all aspects of the PYP. And actually the approaches to learning and the transdisciplinary nature of the PYP has really come to the fore during this time. Chris, you talked about creativity. We're seeing so many creative things coming about, really open-ended sort of tasks or learning engagements that kids are responding to unbelievably well, and creative ideas for learning that teachers otherwise wouldn't have come up with have been a real highlight of what's happened for us. So we're still focusing on our curriculum. We're still trying to look at the yearly overview and pluck out the things that are more relevant for this period of time and focusing on those. And yeah, just to reiterate, the ATLs and transdisciplinary nature of the program is really important, I think.
Thanks, Matt. That was fantastic. Shaz?
Well, we're newbies to all of this. I'm in a Victorian government school, and this is day 8 of remote learning for us. And so we, as people have mentioned before, we are really benefiting from the advice of colleagues around the world who are way ahead of us. Lots of us were particularly active on social media, and you know, people have been so incredibly generous in their sharing of their experience and their resources. And so we were prepared, but you're never as prepared as you think you need to be until you're in it, and we're in it now. I think the two simple mantras that are guiding me personally and that I'm using with our staff and with other colleagues: less is more, and also Maslow before Bloom. This is the time. Nothing else matters. This is all about well-being. We're in a pandemic. You know, we never planned for it, and hopefully we never have to live through this again. But this is definitely the time for looking after ourselves, looking after our kids, our parents, and just recognizing that people are grieving. People are anxious, and that we know that no one will learn unless they are well, unless, you know, their well-being is in place. This is about social emotional learning. It's certainly not the time for coverage of content. So once we reinforce that, we believe that anyway, but in this context, more importantly than ever, once that message got to teachers, and that was from the beginning, but I just keep reinforcing it, you can visibly see them in these meetings just relax. So, you know, we've given teachers permission for flexibility, certainly for innovation, and for taking this time that we've been given by the universe to go to our rooms and think about what we've done, to actually take this time to take those pedagogical risks, those things that we've always wanted to do but feel like, no, we can't because we're too busy, or we've got to get, you know, we've got to get through Victorian curriculum or whatever, to actually innovate, be flexible, and to respond authentically to the needs of your community. So that's been a big one, and that I think is helping with the well-being of our teachers, but also certainly with parents and children and the feedback that we're getting as well. The fact that there is that flexibility there, and the recognition that the time that we're in at the moment is something that none of us was prepared for. We're still not prepared for. Another thing that I think is important, you know, building on what Matt was saying as well, and I think Chris too, that, you know, in this time of uncertainty, and everything in our lives is uncertain, but from a pedagogical point of view, the one thing that we can hold on to in our school, and I think particularly with the support of the IB and the framework that provides, is that no matter what, no one can take away from us our values and beliefs, and particularly our values and beliefs about teaching and learning. So we are really strong at our school that we will not compromise. We will not succumb to the pressure that we're getting from some parents to actually provide worksheets or workbooks or busy works. We will not succumb to that. We just maintain that this is what we believe, this is what we value. If you want to go down to the local newsagent and buy them some sort of busy workbook, that's up to you, but we will not provide that because it's not what we believe is the best for them at the moment.
It's a great message, Shaz. Thank you. And it's great to see that across programs you're getting these links, these shared ideologies that are guiding what we're doing. And Shaz, what a great place to start from. You know, you've had all this experience in front of you, and you're taking the best parts of it and applying it to, you know, a government school in Melbourne, which is fantastic. Manita and Avi, what are some of the trends that you're seeing with online learning? We touched on it before with Avi, but Manita, what are some of the trends that you're seeing, and also what support is available from that you offer and that IB might offer, or that you're aware of that may support schools?
In terms of trends, each and every school is unique because their situation is so different. But I think I connect quite a lot to what Jenny said in the beginning about it's almost like a cycle I can see schools going through. The various stages, the first one being, oh my gosh, you know, survive, continuity. How do we transfer this experience of schooling? And particularly in the primary years, I'm seeing a lot of, there's tension between schools, parents, you know, schools having to justify fees, and, you know, different pressures happening from different ways. And I think school leaders are doing an excellent job of managing all this, as well as Shaz said, the well-being of their teachers and their students, and protecting the learning of their students, putting students first. And I think that's the universal trend that I can see with the schools that we're working with. It is about students first. In terms of support in the PYP, particularly for schools who are going through the authorization process right now, we're looking at ways to, you know, for them to continue on with that. And we're looking at remote visits, which ask the questions that I'm sure school leaders are also going to be asking soon about what is evidence of the pedagogy that we believe in? How do we evidence this in online learning environments? So I'm kind of thinking of things from that perspective. And in many cases, it is, as Jenny said, too early, because schools that are just starting, you can't really see that yet because they're just setting up their systems and putting things in place. But yeah, I think that communication, that through the learning community, and that sense of empathy that what parents are going through, suddenly having to become teachers. You just have to look online to see how much they're appreciating the role of their teachers in the schools now, but still struggling with managing their daily lives, as well as suddenly becoming the child's teacher as well. So these are some of the things I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I would just add to that bit from Monita is that I see that as schools are moving through that cycle that we've spoken about a few times now, I think now the questions are coming up with what does authentic assessment online look like? And I think that's probably a question that TP schools are asking quite a bit at the moment. There's a lot of conversations about feeding forward rather than feeding back and all of those kinds of strategies. But I think it's early days as yet. It's interesting to see. I mean, this is, it's necessity being the mother of invention. Everyone is just in a stage of a little bit of flight and fight and trying to figure out the best way to go ahead with a number of things that we need to be able to do for our students. As far as support is concerned, the IB has put up a document. I'm just trying to find the name now. Yeah, it's called Online Learning, Teaching and Education Continuity Planning for Schools, which is on the PRC. So that's available to all schools who might want to have a look at it. It just provides a list of strategies as well as some sites that could be helpful. People on the chat have already spoken about having the webcasts and so on. So help to schools that may not have that technology to be able to set up for themselves. So that kind of information is available. And again, as Monita and Shaz and everyone has said, I think it's networks that are just standing by each other in order to be able to help and support. There have been some schools that have come on straight away with the resources that they're using, and they've been so open with sharing that across the networks that it's been really fabulous. And in the end, I think what really energizes me right now is just, the mark of the teacher. What is it that they do? They just share, and they care for their students. So it's just amazing.
Thanks, Avi. Jennifer, if I could come back to you, I wonder how you feel e-learning has evolved. Like, given that we've heard everybody's input here, how do you see e-learning has having evolved over the COVID-19 period? And do you think any of the lessons learnt will contribute to learning in the future?
I think that this is probably an opportunity for us, even though we're going through very challenging and disastrous times globally. I see this as an opportunity for us to really rethink, what education looks like for our students, what pedagogy looks like, and to try and transform this. In terms of the evolution of e-learning, this is so unprecedented that research does not actually cover a situation where teachers are teaching at home and students are, in their individual homes. This is unprecedented, and research talks about blended learning environments as students go into a brick and mortar situation for 1 or 2 or 3 days a week, and then they stay at home and learn asynchronously for the rest of the time. So this is a definition now. We've redefined exactly what blended learning looks like now. It's not going into any kind of physical face-to-face traditional environment. So what is blended learning for us? It's a combination of this face-to-face synchronous live connection that I heard so many of us talk about in this group, that those check-ins that we need to have to make sure that we bring that human element. I love, Shaz, your comment about, Maslow before Bloom, because the reason why we all became educators and teachers is because we bring that human element and we promote and encourage that rapport that cannot be replaced by a textbook, a worksheet, a video, or even an AI robot. And so how are we going to try to still promote that human connection and bring that human element as educators? And that is through those check-ins. It is through those face-to-face live synchronous sessions, which may not be focusing on curriculum and checking off off standards and content coverage. That's not what that connection part of blended learning is about. It's about really trying to showcase the human element that we bring as teachers and as students. And so that means that balance of synchronous live and asynchronous learning has to be really carefully considered in terms of context. And I know that there is no black and white, hard, fast rule, oh, it's 30% this or 70% this or 50% this and 50% that. But I do steer clear. I do try to encourage and steer clear from the proportion of your learning for your students the major proportion shouldn't be the face-to-face synchronous live. So we shouldn't be requiring students to be online with you synchronously, for 80% of the time, as an example, because we have to consider accessibility issues. We have to consider that many families, I was talking to educators in the North America region, where they have one device for 6 children, or they don't even have Wi-Fi. And so we really have to be inclusive in how we put together the program, for our students. And that may not mean that you're going to have the majority of your lesson in an online synchronous fashion. If we want to be inclusive and we want to ensure that every student has equal access to learning opportunities as well as some kind of connection. So if there is no Wi-Fi, I suggest even a phone call from teachers, some kind of check-in, something the way you're checking in on your students' well-being if that face-to-face opportunity is not there. So we have to really think about context as well and take context into consideration.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. I thought I'd leave this next question to the DP people, because undoubtedly you've faced some pretty steep challenges with parents. So, David, Anthony, and Sean, how are you advising and supporting your parents through this period? Perhaps if we start with David.
Yeah. Well, actually, funnily enough, it's probably not mainly the DP students, parents who've been in touch with us, but primarily it was getting that message out there from day one that we've got this. Together as a team, we've got this. We will support you. Because what we've got to really remember with those parents is you've got professionals in their own areas who, as Manita said before, are suddenly being asked to become teachers. And the pressure that puts on them, especially if their children are in those examination years as well, with those high stakes things coming up. So it's getting alongside the teachers, giving them some toolbox items to work with, talking to them about how to set up a home learning environment, taking it right back to those basics for their children and making those age and stage appropriate, depending on how old their kids are. Reassuring them that what they're doing is right, and talking to them about, as Jennifer said, the amount of time that the student should be interacting face to face. It, again, reminding them that it is not just taking that normal timetable and transposing it into the home environment. It is different, but we've got this. We've got the collective knowledge of all the educators around the globe, especially the ones tied together with the IB, feeding into this. So we're not going alone as schools. We're going as a huge global team. We're feeding off each other's experiences. We're learning. We're communicating. And that communication, I think, is what has been critical with all of our stakeholders, far more so than what you'd have in a normal school environment, because you're not getting that face-to-face interaction. So that regular communication, telling them what you're doing, why you're doing it, that you've listened to some of that feedback, and how you're going to change your program to adapt and take that on board is critical. And then parents are, again, you can just see the weight come off their shoulders. They're like, okay, well, the school have got this. They know what they're doing. we can sit back and be parents, because that's what they should be. They shouldn't be having to be teachers. They should be being parents and looking after their kids at this time, because as Shaz said, that is the most crucial thing. Even for DP students. And what we've found, because we're having regular sort of well-being check-ins, and then following up on any students who are flagged, it's not the students you'd expect. It's not those ones who are normally flagged for well-being. They're actually quite often, they're coping quite well, because they're used to dealing with adversity, they're used to dealing with challenge. It's the ones who like a regimented structure who've all of a sudden gone off the rails because that has been pulled out from beneath them. And they're the ones that need that help. And you'll only find that out through that regular communication.
Thanks, David. Anthony?
Yeah, I think as David said, really that communication with families has been really helpful for them. But we've found especially that really, as long as the students feel settled, then the parents are pretty happy. So that really dealing with students, the students sort of knowing that they can contact teachers, teachers are contacting them, like through various different means, just maintaining that contact with them. The feedback that we've been receiving from parents is that that's been really appreciated and very, very helpful.
Thanks, Anthony. And Sean?
Yes, I thought I'd add that something that we haven't really or necessarily acknowledged is the fact that themselves and their industries have also been affected by this pandemic as well. So I suppose in my conversations with those parents, and when you pick up the phone and you do start speaking with them, that you realize that they too are working from home and that they are finding challenges as well. And added to, I suppose, the changes and the stresses in their workplace, which is now, of course, their living rooms or their studies, they also have their children at home. So I think it's probably worth acknowledging that that's something that we've come to accommodate working with our parents. The question about, I suppose, communication as well, rather than regular communication, I think back, we're in essentially our third full week now of student-supported learning from home, and we've actually gone the other way. We started, I think, with probably too much communication to parents, and we've actually pared it back to, and the feedback that we received through surveys was that there was almost sort of communication fatigue in some ways. So the communication that goes out to parents now, if it's to a group of parents or to a cohort, is now actually reduced now to 1 day a week. So it all goes out on a Thursday night rather than going out throughout the week. And coming back to, I suppose, a couple of the points about, I suppose, parental pressure and anxiety, I've also found as the DP coordinator, there is a stark contrast between the parents of first-year DP students and second-year DP students. I think the first-year DP students, they're aware and they trust the school and they know that we have enough time to get things on track. But of course, our message to the second-year DP students is that those IAs are still due, the exams are still in November, and unless we hear otherwise, it's basically we're proceeding as planned. And telling students that, and also their parents that, when of course nothing is as it normally would be, is actually becoming, it is placing, I suppose, more and more pressure on the students, and they're aware of it, but then also on, I suppose, that those mini communities within the school.
Speaking about communication and connection and so forth, we've got network leaders here, which is fantastic. I'm just wondering if Sean, Anthony and Shaz could talk about your specific networks and how not only you're connecting with your individual schools, but how are you connecting and supporting each other across schools within your network or community to assist each other? I'm copied into a number of emails, so I've got emails flying all over the place, so I can see there's a lot of connection via email. But are there other ways that you're connecting with each other, supporting each other, sharing ideas? Sean?
Yes. So as part of our network, we meet. We already meet once a term, but what we've actually found whilst we've been facing this is that the use of Google Drives has actually become quite an invaluable tool for us. And then so rather than sending multiple emails, usually a question or an issue will be flagged, and all IB coordinators will be asked to go to that Google Drive and to upload any concern. So what we're doing really is that we're collating either a progress or a status update for whether it be how to conduct the Group 4 IAs, or maybe concerns and questions about the November examinations. And they're probably two examples of late where we've collaborated as an IB network. We're quite fortunate in Victoria and Tasmania that we do have, I suppose, that culture of communication. We are quite candid in terms of the way in which we interact. And we've actually felt, I suppose, in that is that when someone does raise some sort of question or concern, more often than not, one of the other 21 DP coordinators who are already on that recipient list, and there are a couple of sort of like alumnus DP coordinators from the past who we keep in sort of like the recipients list just to sort of tap into their knowledge. And more often than not, someone has had a similar question from supported IBO, and they can quickly sort of send that through. So I suppose it's a really quick and really collaborative way, I suppose, as working as our community to address some of those. I mean, they're really just those data sort of issues, but I think can escalate when we're already quite stressed and already frantically trying to prepare for our lessons.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Anthony, is it similar in New South Wales?
Yeah, I guess it is, although at the moment New South Wales is nearing the end of 2 weeks of holidays. So before that time, there were lots of frantic emails. But one thing we started to do is actually use the program communities area on my IB, and that was helpful.
I'm glad you've raised that.
Yeah, so that because there were so many emails flying backwards and forwards, it was just really hard to keep track of what was going on. And so now that that's actually functioning like properly, which has been great, then we're finding that people are starting to post information there and read that. And that's really working quite well.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're on a break. So next week, we expect that things will change again. Prior to the break, people were really trying to work out how to manage, keep in touch with what was happening with the May exams, because a lot of our schools had anticipated candidates who were sitting for those, and just trying to provide advice for them. And then also, as things started to change, to try and work out how we would support each other in terms of student assessment, particularly in collaborative tasks and especially in the arts, because they're really affected in a lot of their assessment. And particularly because we don't know for the November session how that's going to be assessed at this point, just to really provide advice to teachers in those specific subjects, how to adjust tasks and manage them in an appropriate way without creating extra stress for students.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Shaz, the PYP.
Well, yes, now our network is a massive network. We have over 80 schools and growing in the Victorian network. This is only week 2 for us. So at the moment, we haven't done anything particularly active except for me posting supportive messages through program communities and also Basecamp, because I'm not quite sure where the program communities is up to its full functionality. So we use both. I think we have within this network, we have smaller clusters, which we need to have with the network of our size. And I think that's very authentic connections that people are making anyway. There is a real openness within our network of people just feeling free to be vulnerable enough to ring and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. So I'm sure that's happening. I know that's happening, but we haven't put anything in place as such. I think what we're waiting for is for the needs to emerge. And over the next couple of weeks, I think that'll be the case. I know that, just about every school in this situation has just gone into their own context and is working, rapidly to just get the infrastructure right within their own context. And once we get some sort of flow, then that support will be there according to the needs of the network. Okay,
thanks, Shaz. While I've got you there, and with Manita too, I wonder what the role of play is in an e-learning environment for that we're engaged with. My wife's a prep teacher, and trying to engage with 5-year-olds at the moment in an online learning environment. Play is such an important aspect in a normal school situation. What's the role within an e-learning environment?
What's the role in life, basically? I think it's within any context, and I also think that we need to make sure that we extend this beyond our paradigm of play in the early years. I think more than ever, this is the opportunity to play for everyone, and that shouldn't just be confined to younger kids as well. Play at the moment, I think, is probably one of the greatest things that we can do in order to alleviate anxiety and fear, and also to unleash the creativity that we now have some time to pursue. So what's the role? I mean, my answer is, what's the role of play in life? We all should be playing.
Yeah.
Manita, would you like to?
Yeah, as always, Shaz, you're in my head, and I fully support your idea and your thoughts. Adults also need to play. We need it more than ever right now. I was talking yesterday to a teacher who works with 3-year-olds, and she had just finished a session with puppets and singing songs, and we were talking about, really in the early years, the importance of supporting parents with ideas. Because depending on their situation, how are they engaging children? Because I think expecting early years children to be sitting at a screen and engaging and talking with you is a very unrealistic expectation, and not something that we want them to be doing. So yes, this is a time for them to be doing what they do very naturally. That is play.
I think what's important at the moment is that we need to help our parents value play as learning. Now, that's always been the case, but I think now, again, more than ever, for them to see that play isn't just having fun, that there is significant learning there. And one way that I think that we could do this is to actually give all our parents an outline of our approaches to learning, and take them through just a very simple exercise of observing their child at play, or their children at play, and give them a checklist of all of those skills under those 5 areas, and just to get them to notice, which is what we want teachers to do as well. Just sit back and notice with that checklist in front of them, and I think they will be blown away by the number of skills that those kids are displaying and also developing in the context of play. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to do that, and that's quite an effective way for parents to actually start to realise that play is very much about learning and discovering and exploring and hypothesising and making sense of the world.
Fantastic, Shaz.
I think there are also simple things at home that parents don't realize they can be doing with their children that also involve aspects of transdisciplinary learning, whether it's cooking together, building a den, making a cat castle. All of these things involve learning from different subject areas and are fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the transdisciplinary aspect of particularly the PYP program, this is such a great opportunity for it to live, really, and draw upon all of those various subject areas and so forth, rather than sitting down for a maths lesson or sitting down for a language lesson. And I'm getting emails about I'm delivering spelling lessons and grammar lessons and so forth live online. The transdisciplinary aspect of the program should be opening doors to creativity here. I think it's really important that the role that leaders play here. Just to give you some context, I'm getting a number of emails from schools talking about various types of leadership, and the leaders that we have on this particular podcast are of a particular type, where they're involved and understand the program and pedagogically based and so forth. So I'd love to hear your insights in terms of how, as leaders, David, Chris and Matt, you get involved in the e-learning at your schools? Perhaps if we start with Chris.
Thanks, Steve. Look, I think one of the biggest discussions that we had very early on from a leadership perspective was just where teachers sit in the sense of what's being thrust upon them. And we're in a privileged spot that we've had a 2-year partnership with Professor Lee Waters from Melbourne Uni and looking at making wellbeing visible. And I think one of the things that I take from her is she talked about self-determination theory and this idea that teachers have lost the 3 basic needs. They've lost their ability for autonomy. They've lost their relatedness and their connectedness because of the situation they're in. And they've also lost this ability to sort of understand their competence, because teachers measure themselves by standing in front of their class and the engagement of their kids and the engagement of the lessons. So by taking those 3 things away from them, you actually change how a teacher perceives themselves. So from my perspective, I think the key role of the leader here is one, to be visible. And I suppose the way I look to do that is Zoom's a great tool. I have weekly check-ins with every single one of my teams. I spend half an hour online with them. I give them information. I receive information about how they're going. I listen to them. I am able to read the body language and pick up the phone if I think someone's a little bit wobbly at that time. But it's the connection and it's the connectedness that we're trying to build. And that's from my perspective as a leader, but it's also from the team to know that I'm there and know that I'm part of this process. I think the other piece too that we've really considered is I think it's the role of the leader to try to keep routine and try to keep routine, but with flexibility. And what I mean by that is when we first started, I go back and I remember teachers saying, I'm working 12 hours a day. I lose track of the time. And it's so easy to do. When you're working from a home environment, you can get caught up in what you're doing. Teachers get caught up on the best of days because they're so passionate. But you get caught up and next minute you look at the clock and you haven't had morning tea and you haven't had lunch and it's the end of the day. So I think it's encouraging that routine. It's encouraging the breaks, a little bit like Matt talked about. We try to get ahead of the game. So every Friday afternoon, an email goes home to parents with the following week's learning grid. So teachers are always working that week in front. And I think part of that sort of got us into a routine that enabled teachers to feel like they were in control. And I think the other part too is to create opportunities. Matt's talked about connections with students. We do lots of connections a day. One's probably more of a learning focus. The other one's more of a wellbeing focus. But I think they are vital for leaders to ensure their teachers are doing, because the energy that comes from your kids or your staff members is just vital. It's the one thing you don't want to lose in this whole process. So I think it's about continually giving information as it's needed. It's not overwhelming teachers. I think Sean was saying, or somebody was saying about their limiting the communication. I send 1 to 2 emails a week to the staff. Other than that, it's when I connect with them for 30 minutes. So I try to give them their information. It's allowing them to do their job. I think at any time other than now, you give them autonomy. And I tell you what, there's teachers out there that are just completely and utterly surprising you. Had a great conversation today with the network that I'm in, and we really talked about how, especially our younger teachers who are trying to find their feet in a classroom environment, well, they're absolutely shining in this environment because it's what they're used to and it's what they've been brought up with. So I think, as I said, for me, it's the autonomy. It's trying to create the relatedness and the connectedness. And it's also trying to reassure people that they're doing a good job, and it's looking for the positives, and it's being aware of the emotions that the individuals bring and trying to be able to put support mechanisms in for that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Matt?
I think Chris has mentioned a lot of things that I was going to talk about as well. I think our role as leaders doesn't really change. It's just the how that changes in a remote learning situation. So I think our role is still to provide clarity and direction and vision. We just can't do that by standing in front of a group of people at a staff meeting on a Monday night. So we need to find other ways to do that. And we're really forced into doing it in the ways that our teachers are connecting with students. So we're using the same platforms of Zoom, email, other documents that are in the cloud, etc. So our situation in Australia has been somewhat confusing in recent weeks because we're getting different messages from state governments and federal governments, and the state government will release
consistent around the world.
Yes, and so our teachers are confused as well, and so I think our role as leaders is to provide clarity. So we're creating guidelines and anchoring documents and written expectations about what is important and what not to worry about as well. So that really has been my role in the early phases of remote learning for us. Developing anchoring documents that people can refer back to for support and not having to always ask other people what's going on. And we found that causes a lot of confusion when people are guessing. So being really transparent with all of our decision making as well. I think we've sent out, like other people have mentioned, weekly updates or communication as it's needed, and just talking through the decision making process in those emails or in those broadcasts, because once people understand why a decision's been made and the context behind it, they're a lot more accepting of that, and they understand the thinking behind it. The other thing that we have in place, the same as Chris, is joining collaborative planning meetings. And one of the great things about remote learning is that you can actually get more people into a collaborative planning session than you otherwise would. The structure in our school is that the single subject teachers teach the kids to release the learning group teachers to have their collaborative planning. And once a week for about 40 minutes, the single subject teachers will meet with learning group teachers after school. Well, with the platform that we have now, with the learning menus, all of the single subject teachers and the learning diversity teachers and the wellbeing hub team are able to come in and out of those collaborative planning meetings and really understand what the bigger picture of learning is all about, and are contributing in more significant ways. So to provide the platform for collaboration is probably a really crucial role for us as leaders. I jump into collaborative planning meetings, make myself available to talk to teachers regularly as well. And like most of you, probably have a little checklist of who you've spoken to and who you might need to catch up with in coming days. I'm managing the challenging parents, and fortunately we have very few of those, but we do have situations where parents are in financial strife because of what's going on, and just trying to provide support financially for those parents, and also a little bit of a shoulder to sort of lean on for staff and parents who might be in a situation where a partner or someone in the family has lost a job. So trying to reassure people and provide pathways for them to still remain at the school has been really important.
I was just going to add on to what you're sort of talking about, the clarity and the protection, it's not I suppose I'll use the word protection, but it's actually the role of the leader to be able to look after your staff at this time as well, with so many varying views and perspectives, not just from parents and things, but from departments and from foundations and a whole range of things. So I think the key part is there to provide clarity, but also to be able to protect and support and put in place the strategies and processes that will be in the best interest of your teachers. And I think the other piece there that Matt was talking about, I think collaborative planning is an interesting terminology and an interesting look at this time. And I'd love to do some sort of study around what does true collaborative planning look like, because what we are seeing, and I think the role of the leader is also to be able to encourage growth at this point as well, and look for those growth opportunities. We are seeing that teaching is more visible and collaboration is more visible than it will ever be. You have collaborative planning and then teachers go into their own classrooms and they deliver the curriculum to the students. When you're planning learning grids for 120 students and you're working truly collaborative, challenges like what does a learning intention really look like, and what are the best learning engagements to cater for these kids really comes to the forefront. So I think there's a real opportunity now, and as this sort of takes place, is to be able to celebrate, acknowledge, and help teachers grow to become better teachers when we do come back to face-to-face.
Thanks, Chris.
Let's just go to David now, just to finish off this bit. David, have you got anything to add to the comments of Chris and Matt?
always the pleasure of going last when you've had all the good comments taken away. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Matt. But no, it is really, you are. I think as the leader, you are that stability. You at a time when again the teachers. It was very interesting before. I think it was Chris talking about building the autonomy of the teachers. And that is great. It's reassuring them that what they're doing is good and it's right and it's great for the students. But they're also looking for that reassurance as well. I'm finding a lot of my teachers are almost requesting to be told what to do for that personal reassurance. Because as they're starting to shift in their working patterns, and for some, they may have been working in a certain style for, heaven forbid, 30, 40 years, suddenly they've been thrown into this, and no longer can they go and do their collaboration around a table within their faculty. They're at home. And the situation we're in New Zealand, we're in what they're calling lockdown at the moment, whereas you're basically meant to stay within your four walls. So people are beginning to feel very physically isolated. So again, it's making sure that communication is there as a leader so that emotionally and mentally they're not feeling isolated. We've only sort of gone through about 2 weeks of online learning, but what we did as principals in that second week was made sure that we phoned all the teachers. So we divvied up the teachers between us, phoned them, and the conversation was not about school. It was about how are you, how are your kids, how's life, actually connecting to them as a person as well, because that's what we've got to remember. We're not just the leaders, we're not just the employers, we're not just colleagues, we're also humans, and we've got to hang on to that humanistic side of things as well, especially at this time. So it's bringing that. And as Matt said as well, reassuring them that they will hear from that 2 or 3% of very vocal parents who maybe don't agree with the teaching approach. But what they're not hearing from directly is the 85-90% who are very, very happy with how things are going. So it's our job as well to feed that back to them, to reassure them that what they're doing is excellent, and that consistency of the messaging.
Thanks, David. Yeah, there's some great insights there from all leaders, and really in-depth insights that are going to be of such help to schools entering this situation. Jennifer, I just wanted to finish off with you with a question of what does a good e-learning platform look like? And I know, having seen a number of them, there's such a diverse range of platforms that schools are using and so forth. Some, even as a teacher or an educator, they're quite confusing. Others are quite simple. What, in your opinion, does a really good one look like?
I think rather than focusing on a particular tool or an LMS, it really has to give rise to affordances that the e-learning environment gives us. So can it support differentiated learning? Can it support collaborative intelligence? Can it give recursive feedback? Can it integrate and embed lots of other tools within that system? My belief is a one-stop shop. We don't want parents and students and teachers going to 20 different, websites or different tools, but can this platform really try and encourage all of those affordances that arise from the e-learning environment, as well as focus on deep conceptual understanding and critical thinking, promote that collaboration, but can it be a one-stop shop where we can embed all of the other tools so that our students and our teachers and our whole school community don't have to be learning and overwhelmed with every single, all the digital tools that are available. So that's probably my advice, a one-stop shop that can facilitate all of those affordances that actually give rise to the e-learning environment. Good pedagogical practices at the end of the day.
Thanks, Jenny. That's once again great advice. We've come to the end of our discussion. I can't thank you all enough for your contributions and your insights into e-learning or online learning. I thought we'd just go around the panel quickly one last time and just ask for any final 10-second tips that you might have for schools going through or moving into this environment that might support them in any way, shape or form. I can see people panicking now and thinking, what tip am I going to give? I'm going to start with David, because you complained that you were last time, so you go first this time.
I think two very, very brief ones. One, ensure you've got consistency. Building on what Jennifer's just said, consistency in how the information is presented to students across teachers and across faculties. One of the biggest bits of feedback we've had is if it's not consistent, it derails both the students and the parents. And the other thing is to remember that we're learning. Don't be afraid to try things. Don't be afraid to change, because without that evolution, you'll never get any better. Nobody's getting it right first off. Nobody's getting it right after 2 weeks. It comes after many, many weeks, many months of trial and error. Yeah. So keep trying, keep being willing to adjust.
Thanks, David. Jenny?
I'm going to say something controversial again. Is
Excellent.
That okay? I'm going to advise that people look at their content and their curriculum and either halve it or third it and focus on much deeper learning engagements and experiences. So learning is actually on a higher order level, on a higher thinking level, but also focus on those connections that bring that human element to the learning environment. So
fantastic. Sean?
I suppose my final thoughts are there is probably no better time to review and reflect, and also to do so quite regularly. And I think that comes in the form of either surveys or allowing time in staff meetings for guided discussions, or setting up best practice groups or professional learning groups. And I think having that time to review and reflect, I think, is probably what's going to get us all through.
Thanks, Sean. Chris?
I think my final tip would be around wellbeing, and be explicit and intentional in the delivery of wellbeing opportunities for everybody to engage with, parents, students and staff.
Fantastic. Shaz?
I think the big question at the moment is what really matters. And Jenny, I'd like to be even more controversial. And when you said halve it or third it, I'd like to say or throw it all out, and actually just have a look at, in the context of the here and now, what does really matter. And, you know, if we go back to significant, relevant, you know, challenging, here is the time. Here's also the time for us to demonstrate to everyone what lifelong learning is all about, by showing ourselves as also being learners, as being vulnerable, of, you know, not getting it right straight away. So yeah, lots of questions, lots of time for questioning, and just that, what really matters. What are they going to remember, and what are we going to remember when this is all over?
Yeah. Matt?
I think you just have to jump off the mountain and build your wings on the way down. There's no right way to start. There are a lot of people out there who are in this situation, so don't try and reinvent the wheel. Seek help, but at the same time, trust yourself, and you'll find your own way.
Fantastic. Manita?
Yeah, the big one for me is community, that which includes self. So don't forget to, in all of our programs, we have an element of that. So taking action, community service, these are still important things, and we can support online in various ways, just supporting each other and supporting ourselves. Don't forget yourself, to look after yourself and make sure that your buckets are filled.
Yeah. Anthony?
Yeah, we just really found that encouraging teachers just not to overreach, like to keep it simple and really focus on what's important, has been really good. At first, I was really worried that they weren't doing enough, whereas our surveying was saying that they were doing too much, actually, and it wasn't good for them, and it wasn't as good for the students. So just to keep it simple and focus on what's really important.
Thanks, Anthony. And finally, Avi.
Yeah, I would just say trust yourselves. You're all doing a great job. And at the same time, remember your contexts and be true to those. And we're here to support you in the best possible way that we can. And we're learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I can't thank this group enough. It's been an outstanding opportunity to gather, experts in the field together and have a long form conversation. Hopefully we got out most of what we wanted to say, and I extracted some of your experience, and I'm sure schools are going to see this as a valuable resource to reference when they're considering online learning and so forth. So very humbled to be around you all and to receive the insights and information that you all have. So thank you very much for being part of today. This is episode 1. We intend to have a number of episodes over the next few weeks. So thank you very much for listening, and thanks for being part of it.